Look, I didn't plan on going to war with my HOA that week. Nobody ever does, right? You move into a quiet neighborhood, you mow your lawn, you wave at people you barely like, and you follow just enough rules to avoid getting a passive-aggressive letter about your trash cans. That's the deal. But the day I pulled into my driveway and saw 3 police cruisers lighting up my house like it was some kind of crime scene. Yeah, something in my gut told me this wasn't about grass height or mailbox paint. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter than I should have, heart pounding, already imagining the worst. Because when you're a single mom, your brain doesn't go to misunderstanding, it goes straight to something happened to my kid. And then I saw him. My son, hands up, 17 years old, standing in our driveway like a suspect. And around him, 6 grown men. Calm. Still. Not a single one of them looked nervous. Not even a little. That's when it got weird. Because if you've ever seen people who are actually dangerous or trained, like really trained, you know that stillness. It's not panic. It's control. I got out of the car fast. Too fast. One of the officers turned toward me, hand halfway up like he was about to tell me to stop, but then he paused, looked back at the men, and something shifted. "Ma'am," he said, a little quieter now. "Are you the homeowner?" "Yeah." I snapped, already halfway between scared and furious. "What is going on?" Before he could answer, one of the men, tall, maybe late 30s, wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt, took a step forward and said, calm as anything, "We're just visiting. Just visiting." Like this was a Sunday barbecue and not a full-on police response. The officer looked at him again, longer this time, then glanced at his partner. And I swear, I saw recognition hit. Not confusion. Recognition. Everything de-escalated in about 5 seconds flat. Hands lowered. Voices softened. Radios went quiet. And then, this part still blows my mind, the officer actually apologized. "Ma'am, looks like this was a misunderstanding," he said, clearing his throat like he suddenly wanted to be anywhere else. "We received a report of a suspicious gathering." Suspicious gathering. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw her, standing across the street, arms crossed, that tight little smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Linda Carver, HOA president, self-appointed queen of everything that doesn't concern her. She gave me this look, like she had just won something, like she had caught me doing something wrong, even though she didn't even know what she was looking at. The officers left within minutes. Just like that. No citations. No questions. Nothing. And the 6 men? They relaxed, just slightly. One of them even gave my son a quiet nod like, "You handled that well." That's when I finally understood who they were. Not officially, not out loud, but you don't grow up around military families and miss that kind of presence. These weren't friends. These were operators. And they weren't there by accident. They were there for my son. Now here's the part Linda didn't know, and honestly, the part she should have minded her own business about. My late husband, he wasn't just military. He was part of something most people only hear about in documentaries and action movies. And before he passed, he made arrangements. Real ones. Legal ones. He made sure our son wouldn't grow up without guidance. Without mentorship. Without brothers who understood what it meant to carry that kind of legacy. So those men, they showed up once a year. Quietly. Respectfully. No noise. No attention. Until Linda decided she needed a little excitement in her life. 2 days later, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope that looked way too official for something I didn't ask for. Inside, an $850 fine. Unauthorized assembly. And just to make sure the message landed, they added a little thread at the bottom about placing a lien on my home if I didn't comply. My $350,000 house. Over unauthorized assembly. I actually laughed at first, like a short, sharp kind of laugh you make when something is so ridiculous your brain refuses to process it. Then I read it again, and that's when the anger hit. Not loud, not explosive, cold. I picked up the phone and called the HOA office. It rang twice before she answered. "Carver," she said, no greeting, no warmth, just that same tone she used when she thought she was in control. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice steady. "This is Rachel Turner. I just received a fine, and I'd like an explanation." There was a pause, just long enough to feel intentional. "Oh," she said finally, almost amused. "Yes. That. Like she was talking about a parking ticket. You had a group of individuals gathered on your property. That violates community guidelines. Those individuals were invited guests, I said. Another pause. Then she dropped it. Your late husband's friends need to stop treating this neighborhood like a military base. I don't think I've ever gone that quiet that fast. Because that wasn't about rules anymore. That was personal. That was disrespect, calculated, deliberate, and just cruel enough to let me know she meant it. My hand actually started shaking. Not dramatically, just enough that I had to switch the phone to my other hand. You don't know anything about my husband, I said low. I know enough, she replied, sharper now. And I know this community has standards. Standards. Right. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. And for a second, I just stood there in my kitchen, staring at nothing. Because here's the thing people don't tell you about grief. It doesn't go away. It just waits. And when someone pokes it, it comes back all at once. But this wasn't just grief anymore. This was something else. This was someone trying to control something they didn't understand and disrespecting the one person who made sure my son would never be alone. So I walked into the other room, opened the drawer I hadn't touched in months, and pulled out the folder. My husband's will. Page 7. I already knew what it said, but I needed to see it again. Needed to feel it. Clear as day. A mentorship provision. Official. Signed. Witnessed. And attached to it. Something even Linda definitely didn't see coming. A letter. Stamped. Approved. From the Department of Defense. I sat there for a long moment, just staring at it, and I could feel something shift inside me. Not anger. Not grief. Focus. Because now this wasn't about a fine. This wasn't about HOA rules. This was about someone crossing a line they had absolutely no right to cross. And I realized something in that moment. Linda thought she was enforcing authority, but she had no idea. She had just picked a fight with the wrong family. All right, pause the story for a second, because this is where things go from neighborhood drama to you really messed up and don't even know it yet. According to standard procedure, HOAs do have the authority to enforce community rules, things like parking, noise, gatherings, all that suburban control stuff people love to complain about. But, and this is a big but, that authority is limited. They operate under state law, and they absolutely cannot override federal protections. Ever. From a legal perspective, what Linda did wasn't just overstepping, it was dangerously close to violating federal protections tied to military families. There's something called the Service Members Civil Relief Act, and while most people think it only applies to active duty members, courts have repeatedly taken a very dim view of organizations that harass or target families connected to service members, especially Gold Star families. That's not just bad optics, that's legal exposure. Now layer that with something else, documentation. Signed will. Formal mentorship clause. Department-level acknowledgement. That's not some guys visiting. That's structured, recognized support tied to a deceased service member's final wishes. Try finding that. And suddenly you're not enforcing HOA rules, you're interfering with a legally supported arrangement. And here's where it gets psychological, because this is a psychological trap Linda walked straight into. This is a classic authority bias mixed with control fixation. She saw uniforms, or what she assumed were military types. She felt out of control, and instead of asking questions, she escalated. Why? Because people in positions like HOA leadership sometimes confuse local power with absolute power. They think their rulebook outranks everything. It doesn't. And the worst part? She made it personal. The second she mentioned my husband, she stopped being a rule enforcer and became a liability. The lesson here is, when someone in a small position of authority starts acting like they control everything, they usually don't understand where their authority actually ends. And when that line gets crossed, especially into federal territory, things escalate fast. Now, let's get back to what happened next, because this is where the timeline turns from uncomfortable to unstoppable. So that night, I didn't sleep. Not really. I sat at the kitchen table with that folder open in front of me, reading the same page over and over like it might say something different the 10th time. It didn't, but what it did do was remind me I wasn't guessing, I wasn't overreacting, I wasn't that homeowner complaining about HOA fees. I had something real, something documented, something that didn't care about Linda Carver's opinion. Around midnight, I started taking photos. Every page, every signature, every stamp. No filters, no edits, just clean, clear evidence. Then I emailed everything to a military family attorney a friend had recommended months ago. One of those names you save and hope you never need. Subject line was simple: need advice. HOA targeting military-related mentorship. He replied in under an hour. Which, if you've ever dealt with attorneys, you know that alone is a signal. Call me. That was it. No greeting, no fluff. We spoke for maybe 15 minutes, and somewhere around minute 5, his tone changed. Let's review your situation. More, this is going to be a problem for them. By the time we hung up, I had a plan. By dawn, we had filed formal complaint, federal level, documented harassment tied to a protected military family circumstance. Included everything: timeline, statements. That phone call, quote, I could still hear word for word in my head. And then we waited. Not long. 72 hours. That's all it took. On the third day, I got a call, but not from the HOA. From someone who introduced himself very carefully, very formally, like every word had been practiced. He mentioned coordination with the Department of Veterans Affairs, and then another name that made me sit up straighter: Naval Special Warfare Command. Yeah, that one. He didn't say much. Couldn't, probably, but he confirmed they were aware of the situation and reviewing the matter. Reviewing the matter. That's government language for this is already moving. Now flip to the other side of this story, because while I was sitting there trying to keep my hands steady, things inside that HOA office were starting to crack. Day 5. My phone rings again. Different number. Linda. Except this time, no confidence. No edge. Just tension. Rachel. We may need to revisit the situation, she said, voice tighter than I'd ever heard it. Revisit. That's a funny way to say we're in trouble. I didn't say much, just listened. Let her talk. Let her try to reframe it like this was all some kind of misunderstanding. Because here's the thing. Once someone realizes they've stepped into something bigger than them, they don't apologize right away. They test the waters first. See how bad it is. By day 23, they knew exactly how bad it was. Penalties hit 6 figures. $127,000. And climbing. Legal fees stacking on top like bricks. Insurance? Not covering any of it. Why? Because federal violations aren't exactly something you can just file a claim for and hope disappears. That's when panic really sets in. Not the quiet kind, the loud, scrambling, who approved this kind. Emails start flying. Board members pointing fingers. Emergency meetings. Late night calls. And then, day 26, it went public. Local news picked it up. Now, I'm not someone who ever wanted cameras near my house, but when I saw that headline, I understood exactly what had happened. They didn't just mess with me. They created a story. A bad one. A very bad one. HOA accused of harassing military widow. They used my husband's photo, the one in uniform I keep in the living room. The one my son looks at every morning before school. And suddenly, this wasn't about rules anymore. This was about reputation. And HOAs? They care about 2 things, control and image. Now both were slipping. Fast. Day 28. Linda resigned. Not gracefully. Not proudly. Quietly. Pressured out by the same board that backed her 2 weeks earlier. Funny how that works. But it didn't stop there. Day 31. The management company, the one handling operations, enforcement, all of it, got dropped by their parent corporation. Just cut loose. Why? Because nobody wants to be the company that made national headlines for going after a military family. That's not a brand you recover from easily. And now? Now the damage wasn't just legal, it was financial, structural, community-wide. The new management came in and did what new management always does. They assessed everything. Every liability. Every pending cost. Every settlement projection. And then they did the one thing that really hit everyone else. They raised the HOA fees. From $85 to $340 a month. Yeah, that part spread faster than the news story. Because people will ignore headlines, but they will absolutely notice their bank account changing. Within a week, 47 homeowners signed a petition demanding accountability. 12 families listed their homes for sale. All because one person needed to feel powerful for 5 minutes. And here's where it all comes full circle. Day 43. They showed up at my door. Not just one of them. The whole board. No smiles this time. No crossed arms. No attitude. Just a group of people who finally understood the situation they were in. They handed me a letter. Formal. Typed. Signed. Fine gone. Official apology issued. Posted publicly on the community website. And then the part one didn't expect, but absolutely appreciated. An 8-year agreement. In writing. guaranteeing zero interference with any future visits related to my husband's mentorship arrangement. 8 years. That's longer than most of them will probably even live in this neighborhood. I read it once, then again, then looked up at them. Nobody said anything for a second. Because there wasn't really anything left to say. They had pushed. And the system had pushed back harder. I signed. They left. And just like that, it was over. Or at least, the part they could control was. That weekend, I did something simple. I invited the guys back. Same driveway. Same house. No police this time. No flashing lights. Just a grill, some folding chairs, and the kind of quiet conversation that doesn't need explaining. Neighbors walked by, slower than usual. Some stopped. A few actually came over. Apologized. Awkward at first, but real. And my son? He stood there in the middle of it all, not with his hands up this time, but relaxed. Laughing. Listening. Learning. At one point, he looked at me and asked, "Mom, how did you do all that?" And I didn't give him some long explanation. Didn't talk about legal strategy or federal complaints or any of it. I just went inside, grabbed the folder, and handed it to him. "Your dad did," I said. Because the truth is, this was never about winning. It was about protecting something that was already built for him, and making sure nobody ever tried to take it away again. So, here's the part people usually skip to, but honestly, it's the part that matters most. Not the fines, not the headlines, not even the apology letter sitting in my drawer. It's what all of this actually means when you strip away the drama. Because yeah, on the surface, this looks like a story about an HOA getting put in its place. And sure, there's a little satisfaction in that, I won't lie. But if that's all you take from it, you're missing the bigger picture. The lesson here is, power is only real when it's understood. Linda thought she had power. And technically, she did, within a very small box. Neighborhood rules, community guidelines, that kind of thing. But she treated that small box like it was the entire system, like nothing existed above it. And the moment she stepped outside that boundary, without even realizing it, everything flipped. That's how a lot of these situations happen, by the way. Not just HOAs. Workplaces. Schools. Any system where someone gets a little authority and starts believing it's absolute. This is a psychological trap, and it's more common than people think. It's called authority inflation, where someone confuses enforcement with control. They stop asking questions, stop checking context, and start acting based on assumption. And once that happens, they don't just make mistakes, they double down on them. That's exactly what Linda did. She didn't ask who those men were. She didn't verify anything. She didn't even try to understand the situation. She saw something unfamiliar, and instead of being curious, she became controlling. And control without understanding? That's where damage happens. Now let's talk about the legal side for a second, but I'm going to keep it real simple. From a legal perspective, HOAs are not above the law, not even close. They operate under state regulations, and more importantly, they are always subject to federal protections. Always. So when you have a situation involving military families, especially something tied to documented arrangements, legacy support, or anything recognized at a federal level, you're not just dealing with community rules anymore. You're stepping into a completely different arena. And most HOAs, they're not equipped for that. They don't have the legal infrastructure. They don't have the protection. And they definitely don't have the authority they think they do. Which brings me to something a lot of people don't realize. Documentation changes everything. If I didn't have that will, if I didn't have that letter, if I didn't have something concrete to stand on, this story probably ends very differently. Maybe I fight it. Maybe I pay the fine. Maybe I just avoid the conflict altogether. But when you have proof, real, structured, undeniable proof, you're not arguing anymore. You're presenting facts. And facts don't care about HOA opinions. Another thing, and this one's personal, grief makes people vulnerable. And sometimes, people in positions of small authority don't know how to handle that. Or worse, they ignore it completely. When Linda made that comment about my husband, that wasn't just unprofessional. That was a moment where she crossed from policy into personal territory. And once that line is crossed, everything changes. Because now it's not about rules. It's about respect. And respect, especially for families who've lost someone in service, isn't optional. It shouldn't have to be enforced. But sometimes it is. Now here's the part I want you to really think about, because it's the question I keep coming back to. We talk a lot about supporting service members. You see it on bumper stickers, social media posts, holidays, Memorial Day, Veterans Day, all of that. But what about the families? The ones who stay behind. The ones who rebuild. The ones raising kids with stories instead of presents. Who protects them? Because support isn't just a slogan. It's how you treat people when there's no spotlight on you. When it's just a regular Tuesday, and you're deciding whether to show respect or flex authority. And yeah, in this case, things worked out. The system corrected itself. The damage got contained. People learned, hopefully. But it shouldn't have to escalate that far for someone to be treated with basic decency. That's the part that sticks with me. Not the money, not the headlines, not even the apology. Just that moment, when someone decided they knew enough to judge and didn't realize how wrong they were. So if you take anything from this, anything at all, let it be this. Ask questions before you assume. Understand before you enforce. And never mistake a small position of power for real authority. Because real authority? It doesn't need to prove itself. And it definitely doesn't go looking for fights it can't win. Now I'm curious, because I know this kind of thing happens more than people talk about. Have you ever dealt with an HOA or anyone in a position like that who pushed things way too far? And more importantly, do you think families of fallen service members get the respect they actually deserve or just the appearance of it? Let me know.